All right, perfect. Well, welcome everyone to one of our many webinar series for Bike Month in June. Today's webinar is the impact of cycling facilities on travel behavior change. And so the quote is, if we build it, will they come? And so we're here with Dr. Raktim Mitra, who is a professor and director at the School of Urban and Regional Planning at the Toronto Metropolitan University, and he's the co-director of Transform Research Laboratory. So we're super excited to have him here to share his insights on all sorts of cycling facilities, such as bike lanes and whatnot. But before we get into that, I just want to quickly explain, what is this whole program about? Why are we delivering this? Who am I? All that sort of stuff. So just to get going, so I'm Jesse. I'm a program manager here at Point A. We're a nonprofit where we try to help people commute more sustainably and through carpooling, through shuttle buses, cycling, whatever it might be. And so we're part of a larger initiative here in Ontario. It's called the Sparky program. And so basically, it's an initiative where we offer commuting services at workplaces to empower possibilities for how Ontarians commute. And so as this kind of purpose-driven initiative, we educate and improve access to sustainable modes of transportation, such as carpooling, public transit, micromobility, such as biking. And it's kind of this larger initiative that we do to help boost kind of these broader societal goals of promoting multimodal transportation, improving commuter quality of life and access, and kind of reducing negative health and environmental impacts such as air pollution. And so kind of the vision of what we do is to create this efficient, equitable, and sustainable transportation system by empowering people with safe, convenient, and environmentally friendly commuting choices that reduce our reliance on single occupancy vehicle driving. And so basically, the Sparky program is based in many different regions. So here in Toronto, we have York Region, Hamilton, Durham, Halton Region, London, Bruce County, and Greater Sudbury. And so lots of different municipalities are supporting this cause. So we're super excited to have them all supporting this and hope to continue to expand our program. And so I'm going to have some poll questions here. So if you've been here to our webinars before, you know what's up. Same questions before, but if you don't know, we ask these poll questions before and after the webinar, just to understand, where do you come from, and just want to learn more about who you are. And so I'm going to go ahead and launch these. And I encourage you to go and answer these poll questions because basically at the end of this webinar, we will pick one lucky winner from whoever attends this webinar to get a $20 gift card. And so, yeah, I encourage you all to go ahead, fill it out, give it out. So leave it out for 2 minutes. I'll probably say about 30 more seconds. So in the meantime, I hope everyone's enjoying this lovely weather. It's quite hot here in Toronto. I don't know how it is if you're coming from other parts of Ontario, but it's a great day to go biking. So. All right, I'm going to close the poll in 15 seconds. Okay. All right, so that's that. And so without further ado, let me invite Dr. Mitra to go ahead and introduce himself and take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this event. I'm going to take a few moments to share my slide and then we'll get going. All right, so my name is Raktim Mitra. I'm a professor of urban planning at Toronto Metropolitan University. And it's an absolute pleasure to join you all today and talk about this very timely topic, bicycle infrastructure, and the potential impacts of them on travel behavior. But at the same time, I want to take a moment to discuss the challenges of advancing this active transportation agenda because that's important. Now, before coming to this event, I was not really sure who the audience would be, but from the responses of the polls, it seems like many of us are here who are already cyclists or know a fair bit about cycling. So some of the content of this presentation may seem somewhat redundant, but I think that's okay. Sometimes it's important to reinforce the knowledge that we already know. Maybe you get something, some new information about the topics that you already have some familiarity with. So as you know, any research program like ours involves a lot of partners and commitments from other researchers. I could not have done the work that I have done on my own, and I just wanted to acknowledge the partners that I work with more regularly on this cycling research. Before I start, we run a transportation research lab called Transform. The QR code is here on the slide. So if on this website we have many reports focusing on various topics around transportation, cycling, public transit, driverless cars. So if you have a moment, I invite you to explore if you're interested. But for today's presentation, I have organized this presentation around 4 key questions, and these are here on this slide. And the plan is for me to talk for about 30 minutes, and then hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for some Q&A. And I'm in this short amount of time, I don't intend to, or I don't expect to go deep into many of these questions, because as you can appreciate that these are big questions to answer. But if there are follow-up questions, I'll be happy to address them after the presentation. So to start, the first question that we all should begin with is, why is bicycle infrastructure important? Or rather, why is cycling important? So there are some things that we all know that, okay, bicycle is an environmentally sustainable transportation choice. If more and more people bike more and drive less, then there's potentially some benefits in terms of reduced greenhouse gas emissions. We also know that bicycles are a healthy transportation choice, such that it enables physical activity. There's a lot of work that's being done where we emphasize bicycle as something that enables and advances equitable transportation systems, because bicycles are a low-cost transportation option, and it enables accessibility to people of all ages and all abilities, children and older adults and working adults alike. But I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking specifically about bicycling as an effective use of limited urban space, which I feel like we don't talk. We should be talking more about this, and we sometimes don't. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time on this last issue. So, in North America in general, and Ontario is no exception to that, there's been prominent policies that speaks to the idea of we should build more roads to move people. And as many of you would agree that, emphasizing on one particular transportation option is perhaps not the best thing to do. In particular, emphasizing only on cars and driving is probably the least efficient way of thinking about transportation. Why? Because highways are very expensive, because from the perspective of space utilization, it's a very inefficient use of space. Highways take more space per car because cars are driving very fast. As a result, they need more headways between the two cars. So you need literally more space per car on a highway than what we would need in a collector road or a local road per se. So when we're talking about highway, we are immediately falling into the trap of an inefficient use of our urban space. And then, we all, or some of us know about this concept of induced travel. That is, when we build roads, it creates more capacity. That is, we see as users of streets that we can use this newly added capacity to travel faster and farther. And as a result, more and more people would want to drive. And soon this increased capacity would be matched by an increased demand, and roads would be congested again. And the highways that we have are good examples of that. Highway 401, for example, was built in 1950s. By 1970s, they were congested again. There were multiple rounds of expansions, and the highway is still congested. So there's not really a future where we can build our way out of congestion by building roads only. But there are other aspects of it. When we build a transportation system that is primarily focused on highways and cars, we need more space within our urban areas that we need to allocate for parking. This is a picture from London, Ontario, and there was a CBC article a few years back that says the city has about 30 acres of parking space that are literally empty most of the time. But you have to design these facilities if we expect most people to drive everywhere. But at a more granular level, these types of urban development or road development per se has an impact on how it shapes our urban areas. And here are two pictures, one from Toronto and one from Mississauga. You would notice that Mississauga, a city that is built primarily around automobiles, it has larger blocks and more white spaces, meaning more road spaces. Why? Because as it was built primarily for automobiles, the roads had to be wider. And when we build wider roads, smaller walkable city blocks don't make much sense because you would not have enough space between the two parallel roads if we were building it that way. So naturally then from pedestrian small blocks, the urban form transitions to what we know as super blocks. So very large blocks that are not necessarily walkable within. So in a way, it kind of changes the way the urban areas looks. It is detrimental to pedestrian-oriented residential or pedestrian-oriented commercial use. So it changes the way in which the urban areas work. On the other hand, multimodal transport is more space efficient. This is a picture. I mean, I'm sure many of us have seen various forms of this picture at various times. Basically, what it shows is that if we were to fit 40 individuals or 40 road users in a road space, how much space will we need for them to use a road space? And as you can see, public transit, just one bus, 40 cars and 40 cyclists. In my view, in an ideal urban transportation system, we should see a combination of all these elements where people use bikes for short distance or walk to short distances. They use public transport to major destinations such as work, major commercial centers, and places that cannot be reached using bicycles or public transportation. People would drive to those places. So that arrangement or that combination of multiple modes should be the most efficient in terms of our use of space. Now, in connection to this, we also should appreciate that transportation and urban form, they cannot be separated from one another. And from the 1990s, we have heard about various concepts that speaks to this connection. We talked about transit-oriented development in the 1990s. Then in early 2000s, everyone was talking about complete communities. And now 15-minute city has become the new buzzword. But in the end of the day, they all speak to the same concept, being that we, as urban planners, we want to create an urban form where our daily necessities should be located within short walking or biking distances. And then the major destinations should be connected by public transit. And that would create the most sustainable and most efficient use of space and lively neighborhoods as well. But one of the questions that I often hear from many is that, okay, so I understand that these are the concepts and we could build cities like that, but over the last 70, 80 years, we have not done that. Our cities, most of the region in the GTHA, for example, are not perhaps 15-minute cities. Or maybe they are, but the built form certainly does not reflect the concepts of 15-minute cities. So does cycling have a role to play in the current form of our urban regions? So with that question in mind, that would be about 10 years ago. We undertook a study supported by Metrolinx that tried to explore the proportion of trips in the GTA that are actually short trips, but are not walked or biked at this time. And what we did is that we looked at our regional transportation survey data, the Transportation Tomorrow survey. Many of you may already know the data. So we looked at the data and we identified trips that are less than 5 kilometers in length, that are not currently walked or biked, that are solo trips, that are trips that are not being traveled with other people, uh, and uh, uh, and then what we saw was that, in fact, uh, about 30% of all trips in the GTHA qualify as these potentially cyclable trips that are not cycled. So in terms of the quantity, that's about 4.4 million trips a day. And then when we look at where these trips are located, you can see that they're everywhere. So there's no reason to think that um, in large cities, people make shorter trips, and in more suburban locations, people are making longer trips. In fact, in many suburban communities across the GTHA, a big proportion of the current trips are actually very short trips that are taken solo, but they're not taken on a bike or on foot. So what I'm trying to say is that there's certainly opportunities where some of these short trips could be taken using other modes than private automobiles. But as we all know, these many of these communities or major streets within these communities are built with drivers in mind. So to enable or create opportunities where some of these trips could actually be taken using bicycles or micromobility as they're being more popular now, we need to start building these facilities. So unless we provide these facilities, we cannot expect that people would suddenly start adopting bicycles and share the road space on a bicycle with fast moving cars. So that's just unreasonable expectation. So with that being said, uh, I wanted to come to the second question that we wanted to discuss today is that do we need or why do we need a different planning approach? And so this is uh, a map of City of Toronto and its bicycle infrastructure. The map was prepared by Anthony Smith. He runs a page called Safe Streets TO and creates all these interesting maps related to transportation in this region. If you don't know of him or his work, I encourage you to explore. But I mean, the map, in fact, shows uh, bicycle rates in the city of Toronto, the locations of bicycle infrastructure, as well as the three pieces of cycling facilities that currently the province is proposing that they take them away. So I don't want to get into that discussion in this talk, but I just wanted to discuss what this map is about. But if you look at this map in general, you will notice that there are pockets within the city of Toronto that has very high rates of people who are commuting using a bicycle. And in Toronto, similar to several other municipalities in Canada, including some in the GTA, the cities have done uh, the cities have made amazing progress in terms of providing cycling facilities, particularly over the last 10-year period. And you can see that in many of the neighborhoods where there's already high demand for bicycling or very high rate of bicycle-based commutes, there are various forms of cycling facilities already exist. But as we move out from the downtown core, we see that cycling rates fall, and as a result, or not, I shouldn't say as a result, and cycling rates fall, and the existence of cycling facilities are also become rarer, which the lower cycling rate is not surprising, because as I mentioned, many of these communities were developed with automobiles in mind. There's simply nowhere to bike to, right? If we build communities that are residential only, and there's nothing else in the next 10 kilometers, why would people bike? Where will they go? And at the same time, the road infrastructure are often not supportive to cycling. So when we, again, to put things in perspective, when we look at the regional rate or mode share of cycling for commute purposes, the about 1 to 2% people in the GTHA commute using bicycles. But then when we look locally, there are neighborhoods within the city of Toronto and some other cities within the GTHA where this mode share exceeds 10%. So the demand for cycling is not the same everywhere. But I guess the reason why I wanted to show this in respect to our discussion around the need for a new approach to cycling planning is that what this map shows also is that if we were to plan to meet the current demand for cycling, we would not build cycling facilities in any location outside of downtown Toronto. Because again, I mean, this is a picture of the traditional 4-step transportation modeling system. If you are in the field of transportation planning, you would know what this is. Essentially, this is the standard method, simplified standard method that's used to plan for roads and public transit and other things. What it does is that it studies how many trips are being generated in a region. It studies where these trips are going. It studies the mode split between different modes, and then based on that pattern and a projection of future population, it kind of projects, or it estimates the number of trips by car, by public transport, by bicycle, by walk to different destinations. And based on that projections, we try to understand if the current transportation facilities will meet that future demand. If we see that they will not meet the future demand, then that means that that piece of road or that piece of public transportation infrastructure needs expansion or needs more capacity. Now, as you can see, that there's a fundamental flaw in this whole process, and the flaw being that in this transportation planning approach, we assume a continuation of current travel behavior. It basically assumes that if today 50% of people who are coming to downtown Toronto drive here, 20 years from now, the ratio would still be the same. 50% of the people who would come to downtown Toronto 20 years later would drive. And, this analysis, this type of analysis then doesn't work very well when we plan for bicycles, because as you know, when we look at the current cyclist on the road, as I mentioned, region-wide, it's only 1 to 2%. There are pockets within the large cities that have higher percentages. So the question then becomes, should we plan for people who currently cycle, or should we also plan for people who are potential cyclists, that is, who would cycle if they're comfortable doing so? So in this connection, some of you may aware that of this 4 types of cyclist typology that was developed in Portland, Oregon, and then it was tested for many other US metropolitan areas, and now many transportation plans or active transportation plans, even some within the GTA, are using this typology to plan for bicycle infrastructure. But what is generally shows, the percentages, of course, can vary from region to region, but in a broad stroke, what this diagram shows is that there's actually a very low proportion of people, about 1% based on Portland data, who can be identified as strong and experienced cyclists, that these people would cycle no matter what. And then there are about 7% in some areas that varies between 5 to 10, who are called the enthusiastic and confident cyclists. That is, they are comfortable cycling if facilities are there and for short distances of travel. That is, when we have a bike lane, they travel. And if we look at the city map that I just showed a minute ago, we see that reflected in the current map of cycling facilities. But then there's the majority of population in an urban region who are actually interested in cycling, but they're concerned. That is, they're just not confident that the environments are safe for cycling. And we could argue that if we are planning for cycling, that is, if the goal of our transportation planning is to not continue the status quo, but instead, if the goal is to ensure a mode shift, that is, we want some of the people who are driving now to shorter distances to consider other transportation options, then this is the population that we need to tap onto. That is, we should not be planning focusing on the current transportation behavior, but we should focus instead on what is possible with more facilities, with safer environment. So what that means is that this traditional method of predict and provide, that is planning for transportation through statistical modeling and prediction, does not really work very well in a multimodal transportation context. Instead, the more appropriate approach perhaps is a debate and decide approach, where advocacy becomes critically important, and then we need good case studies that shows evidence of success, and then decisions become more political and democratic rather than more technocratic. So now we come to the big question of, if we build it, will they come? So what are the evidence that we can see? And in the GTHA over the past few years, we have done quite a few studies focusing on this very question. What we did, and as you will see in this map, is that we focused on a few streets where new bicycle facilities were built within the past 2 to 4 years. But then we compared them with streets that are very similar in conditions, but they don't have a cycling facility on them. So this is a more quasi-experimental approach of studying. And the reason why we did this is that, look, If we build a new cycling facility, oftentimes the city sends out or cities send out traffic counters and we see a significant increase in bicycling. But the extent to which this increase is caused by the new cycling facility is unclear because one, they could be the result of route substitution. That is, people who were bicycling elsewhere, they are now cycling on a street because it has an improved cycling facility. Or uh, it could be an effect of a general increase in cycling across the region. What we know is happening, regardless of cycling facilities, interest in cycling is increasing everywhere. So regardless of where we look, we expect to see some increase in cycling rates. So how do we then isolate the effect of a cycling facility from elsewhere? And to do that, we compared them with similar locations with no cycling facility. So, then we get into these complicated models and stuff like that. I have put the table there. You can review. The data is all there. But what we saw in very general forms is written on the left hand side. Basically, what we saw is that in neighborhoods with new cycling facility, residents were 2.26 times, residents had 2.26 times higher odds of cycling more regularly on that street compared to the odds of cycling in a similar street without a facility. And when it comes to mode substitution, that is whether someone were using something else, but now bicycling more frequently, we saw that regular cyclists who live near a new cycling facility were near almost 3 times more likely to commute more often on a bicycle. What that means is that, people who are cycling maybe once a week, they are now cycling almost every day. So about 3 times likelihood compared to other regular cyclists who live in neighborhoods with no facility. We did not, however, see any statistical difference in cycling frequency among occasional cyclists. So what it means is that at least within the first 2 to 4 years of a bike facility construction in both suburban and urban areas, we saw that people who are regular cyclists, they are cycling more frequently, and they're substituting other modes for cycling. But at least in the first couple of years, we didn't see a significant impact of non-cyclists taking on cycling as much. Now, when we look at the factors that explain more frequent cycling, it's interesting to see that, as I mentioned, that those who are previous regular cyclists, they are more likely to cycle even more. Younger people were more likely to cycle even more, which is not unexpected. Urban areas, those living in urban neighborhoods were more likely to cycle more, which is also not unexpected. But as you can see, the effect of urban versus suburban locations is very small compared to all other factors. Some of the most important factors that explain frequent cyclists are separated cycling facilities. As you can see, cycle track has the second highest impact. Bike lanes, on the other hand, had no statistical impact on increased cycling. So separated facilities are important, painted bike lanes, not so effective. Another important factor is the accessibility provided by these cycling facilities. So if we build a cycling facility on a new subdivision, which is happening everywhere within the GTHA, and there's a good reason for it, which I'll get to in a few minutes. But when there is a cycling facility that is isolated, not part of a connected network of facilities, we don't expect a lot of people to use those facilities compared to cycling facilities that connect to a more robust network. So that brings us back to this, is that should we then not build cycling facilities in areas that have low cycling rates? My argument would be that we should continue to build cycling facilities in areas of low cycling for two reasons. One is that we know that in the suburban locations there are a lot of potential. A lot of current trips are already short trips that can be converted to walking or bicycling trips if the right facilities are provided. So there is a rationale for building facilities to connect residential areas with short destinations. But on the other hand, we should also continue to build cycling facilities in suburban locations, because what we're actually trying to do is to build that robust network. Every piece of facility over time will contribute to this larger network cycling facilities. And as I showed in the last slide, that this accessibility to a larger network of cycling infrastructure is critically important when it comes to people cycling more frequently on these facilities. So I know we are kind of close to one, so I wanted to very quickly go over a few last slides, which talks about the broader challenges to bicycling infrastructure planning. And the first one is the politics of automobility. As we know that, owning and driving cars, it manifests our neoliberal values that are related to our individual freedom, privatization, individualization. And as a result, it's easy to politicize those values. And that's what many of our politicians do, where non-drivers' interests become politicized. Oftentimes we see in various reports that bicycles are political. In our works, we have argued that bicycle is actually not political. It's the cars that are political. And the reason I say this is that, there is a lot of controversy lately in terms of cycling facilities. But if we look closely, we'll notice that bicycle is only controversial when it takes away space from cars. When it is not taking away space from cars, like off-street cycling facilities, everyone is supportive of cycling infrastructure. So it's not bicycles that are political. It's the automobiles and the culture, the neoliberal culture of automobility that is being weaponized weaponized for political interests. But there are broader, more technical issues. There are all engineering standards where roads are built based on level of surface standards. And many of you, if you work in the municipalities, you know what they are. Essentially, these engineering standards say that the best road is a road where there is free flow of traffic. And where the traffic flow is interrupted, that's not a good road, right? Now, how do we place bicycles in this whole level of service discussion? Recently, one of the concepts that's often being used in cycling planning is called the level of traffic stress. That is a best quality of cycling infrastructure is the infrastructure where that causes minimum stress to people who are cycling. So those are called the AAA cycling facilities for all ages and abilities. But then if you look at these four pictures, the first picture has two driving lanes and then a turning lane. The second one has two driving lanes, but to accommodate bike lanes, they took away the turning lanes. The third one brought back the turning lanes, but then the bike lanes are more safer, like they are now buffered. But then as we move along from LTS4 to LTS1, of course, the road capacity for cars is decreasing. So according to the old engineering standard, the level of service on these road spaces are decreasing. So how do we balance these two aspects? Of course, a safer road has benefits in terms of saved lives and saved injuries. If we have less space for cars, that costs less to build. There are GHG benefits of fewer cars on roads, but we haven't really been able to come up with standards that can effectively combine these costs and benefits. So when it comes to, discussions on a planner's table or engineer's table or with the politicians, these issues often becomes contentious as a result because we don't have a response. What we have are some old engineering standards and modern alternatives, but we don't know how they interact with each other. Then comes the question about parking requirements, where there's a perception that parking enables increased retail. And there's also a perception that parking is a right and it's not a privilege. And I was talking to a city councillor in Montreal 2 weeks ago, and she mentioned an interesting point, and she said, as a municipality, why should the city ensure that everyone can have a space for a vehicle that they privately own when the city can actually provide more resources where people can reach destinations using publicly owned devices, such as a bike share, such as public transit? So the question then is it a city's obligation to provide parking to every citizen? Is it a right for a citizen to have a parking spot, or is it a privilege? We don't know the answer to that, and it's debated. So I do think, after all these things, that we all understand that change takes time. In this current circumstances, advocacy is critical. As new data continues to emerge, we can see these new data and how they're informing decision making in practice. Cities are becoming more interested in this data. We are being asked often to provide this data, and we are very pleased to have been asked. And in many cases, we are collaborating with community-based organizations with cities to evidence evidence of the benefits of multimodal transportation systems, including cycling. So there is no easy way of solving the current challenges that we have. Congestion has been an issue since the 1950s. 75 years later, we are still talking about congestion. So these changes will take time, but the progress that we see are encouraging, and I hope that this progress would continue. So thank you.
Okay, lovely. Let's give a round of applause to Dr. Mitra. Thank you so much for all of your insights there. Now we're just going to quickly open up to the Q&A. So if you have any questions, yes, please raise your hand. I'll give you mic access. So we'll start off with Matt Lee.
Sorry about that. I clicked the wrong button.
Okay, no worries. I guess while we're waiting for more questions, I actually have one question. So I'm going to start off with a story. So this happened to me last evening. I was biking on an Ontario road and with my road bike. So I was going a pretty decent speed, obviously not as fast as a car. and there were two drivers who were honking on my rear, so behind me, and then one driver decided to kind of ride right next to me and was yelling, telling me that I shouldn't be on the road, this sort of stuff. And it's like a very unfortunate and scary situation to be part of, but that's kind of the reality of people thinking like the driver entitlement is kind of a big part of that culture. And I know, so cycling infrastructure kind of helps mitigate a lot of those risks for sure. But I think there's also kind of there might be a sense too of like, without the culture piece of like people getting active in it, there's not much use of like using the bike lanes, and if that makes sense. So I'm wondering, what are, outside of like just building more cycling infrastructure, what are like the more human or active programming pieces that I guess organizations can do to kind of help foster the cycling culture?
Yeah, I mean, in my view, advocacy is the key, right? I mean, when we think about cities with great bicycling culture like Amsterdam and Copenhagen, it started with strong advocacy. That followed infrastructure, and that followed higher rates of cycling, right? So, as I was saying, that this concept of the dominance of automobile is so entrenched in the Western culture of mobility that cycling is seen as a counterculture, right? Cyclists are, and historically, they're seen as counterculture folks. But when we see, when we compare areas in more city neighborhoods versus more suburban neighborhoods, we can already see the difference in people's acceptance in cycling, right? Where people in more city settings are more accommodating, while there's always exceptions. But as they see more and more cyclists, as they see more cycling infrastructure, as they see more advocacy around cycling, they become more used to it. So, like I said, change is difficult. It takes time, but advocacy is very important.
All right, thank you for that. We have a question from Daryl Young. On a similar tangent, what role can public health departments play in improving bicycle infrastructure in communities?
That's a very interesting question. And I feel like, I'm speaking of this question of advocacy, this is where the role of public health agencies become very important. In terms of building bike infrastructure, basically city planning department plans them, planners plan them, engineers build them, and public health professionals can really work in this area of kind of changing the culture around cycling, much like what we have done around smoking, much like what we have done around vaccinations, right? I do a lot of work with health scientists, including work on bicycles, and we're trying to understand, how cycling facilities are planned and what are the areas where different professions can play a role. The reason why public health became interested in active transportation in the very first place was based on the successes that they had in fighting smoking and cancer, right? So that we know that public health campaigns and outreach and advocacy has a significant role in changing people's behavior. So in my view, I'm not a public health scientist. I may be missing something, but in my view, that is a critical role, and our public health colleagues can take a leadership in that area.
Okay, and then we just got one more question from Ashley. In your opinion, what's the best way to now put this research into practice to build more protected bike lanes?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, there are two different ways of thinking about it. As academics, what we expect is that the research that we do and the data and evidence that we produce informs planning decisions. So, when planners put together a proposal for a bike lane, they can use the data that we have produced and they can go to the counselors and say that, look, they have done this and this in other locations, and this is the evidence of benefit. So that's the most obvious and most straightforward way of our research informing in advancing the policy. But there's also opportunities in working collaboratively between municipalities and researchers, and we're doing some of the work now is developing some tools, right? So if we can build some tools that can help our professional friends understand the benefits of some of these works in different contexts at different capacity, then that also kind of helps inform research. Like we're doing a work, for example, now that kind of touches on this much discussed issue about, does bike lanes create more congestion, right? We know that it's much debated, but there is not a lot of data out there. So we are trying to develop a tool that can help us understand that if we build a bike lane on a 4-lane street, what is the kind of congestion that we can expect versus a bike lane on a 2-lane street in a suburban context. So tools like this can be useful, and we whenever we produce something, from our end, we are trying to put or put together professional reports that are kind of written for a professional audience, and some of those reports can be found on our lab's website. So I welcome to everyone to explore, and if you see that there's an opportunity where you can use some of our expertise to inform your planning, we are always happy to help.
Okay, perfect. So unfortunately, that'll be all the questions for today. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And so we're going to start with kind of these poll questions that we have after every webinar. So feel free to go ahead and answer those questions real quick. It gives us insights on how you felt about this webinar and any sort of topics you want us to cover in future webinars here at Spark Commute. In the meantime, I'm just going to quickly wrap up and talk about what's next. So basically, we're still pretty good. We're only 1/3 of the way in June. So I encourage everyone to go out there, go cycle, whether it's for commuting purposes, recreational, or just to do errands or whatever not. Go do that. We also have tons of more webinars happening. So we had one with TMU with Dr. Mitra. So thank you so much for that. We have more from Cycle Toronto, Wellesley Institute, City of Toronto, whatever not. So if you go to sparkcommute.ca, go to our home screen and you go scroll down, you'll see a whole list of different webinars available by different people. They're all really fantastic and unique topics that might interest you in one or two things or even more. So go ahead, check that out. And of course, if you go cycle, go on our website again or our app, sparkcommute.ca. Every trip you log is an entry to a random prize draw for a $50 gift card prize based on which region you're a part of. So I encourage you to not only cycle for fun and all that great stuff, but you can also be incentivized with a $50 gift card. So go ahead and do that. And as I promised, as in the early part, there will be one lucky prize draw winner for today's webinar. So I'm going to go. So I prepared a fun wheel of names. So I'm going to go ahead and spin this, and hopefully someone here is still here. All right, and ooh, it's coming close. Okay, so we got Sunny. Congrats, Sunny, you are our winner for today's webinar. So I'll reach out to you afterwards to get you your $20 gift card prize. Thank you all so much for attending today's webinar, and I hope to see you all in future webinars. Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.